The square outside the golden compasses is still carrying the last movements of the day. Carts pass over uneven stone, shoes cross the open market ground, and bundles of paper or finished books travel between doors that have handled trade since morning. Antwerp is one of Europe's great printing cities, joined in that distinction by Paris and Venice. Yet the entrance is not a public monument. In the year 1580, it belongs to a working household whose rooms hold paper, metal type, ink, accounts, meals, letters, and the ordinary fatigue of a long day. Christophe Plantin moved his printing business to Vrijdaagmarkt in 1576. 4 years later, the new workshop came into use. The sign of the golden compasses identified a house where family life and commercial work touched one another without becoming the same thing. A visitor arriving near evening might notice the scale of the enterprise only indirectly. A delivery waits to be checked, a worker leaves with darkened hands, and repeated pressure can be heard through a workshop doorway. This is a representative evening rather than a surviving diary entry for one exact date. The records preserve the organization of Plantin's business with unusual detail, but they do not preserve the weather, the final visitor, or the last sentence set in type on a chosen night. The absence of those details is useful. It leaves the workshop free of invented drama. The day has simply been long, and the work is moving toward the slower decisions that come when daylight narrows and every object must be left in a condition that tomorrow can understand. It also prevents the closing hours from becoming a convenient collection of modern assumptions about bells, meals, lamps, or workshop rules. Inside, the pace is not silence yet. It is a reduction. A press finishes the work already prepared for it. A compositor completes a line rather than beginning a new page. Damp sheets hang where air can reach them. A proof lies under a reader's attention. No single movement explains the whole building. The printing house works because many small tasks arrive in the proper order, and the evening becomes calm only when those tasks begin to separate, one by one, from the noise of production. A house that has spent the day multiplying words now reaches rest by limiting action, not by producing a final ceremonial moment. Plantin's business had grown with remarkable speed. Around 1574, he employed more than 50 people, and a detailed count from 1575 records 56 men, 32 printers, 20 compositors, 3 proofreaders, and 1 unskilled laborer. That count belongs to the business shortly before the move to Vrijdaagmarkt, not to a roll call for this particular evening. It nevertheless shows the scale that the new premises had to serve. By 1580, there were at least 16 presses connected with the enterprise, making the Officina Plantiniana the largest printing business of its kind. A printing house of this size was not only a room of presses. Editors prepared texts. Compositors arranged letters. Printers and inkers worked at the machines. Proofreaders compared impressions with copy. Apprentices carried, hung, sorted, and learned. Beyond the household, paper makers, type founders, engravers, woodcutters, binders, booksellers, agents, and carriers extended the work into other streets and other cities. A book crossed many hands before it could rest on a reader's table, and the quiet of evening gathered gradually across this entire chain. The rooms visible in the museum today were shaped by several generations. The oldest surviving presses belonged to the early 17th century, and important parts of the house were altered or enlarged in the 17th century. A careful view of 1580 must therefore rest on the documented workshop rather than on every object now standing in the complex. What survives most securely is the relationship between home, work, commerce, archives, and craft. That relationship gives the building its unusual historical clarity. The present complex is valuable precisely because its layers can be distinguished rather than compressed into one imagined Renaissance interior. The scale of the business did not remove the need for close attention. it multiplied it. 16 presses could not be fed by haste alone. Paper had to arrive in suitable condition. Copy had to be prepared. Type had to return to the correct cases. Impressions had to be examined before large numbers were produced. Accounts had to connect labor, materials, sales, and credit. The evening does not bring a factory to an abrupt stop. It reveals how much order was required to let a large workshop pause without losing its place. Tomorrow's efficiency depends on tonight's placement, and the calm of the room is earned by hundreds of remembered positions. Before metal type could be arranged, a text had to become usable inside the printing house. Manuscripts came from authors, scholars, governments, or the church, while some projects were initiated by the publisher himself. The decision to print involved more than literary interest. Size, audience, permission, cost, paper, type, illustrations, and possible partners all belonged to the same calculation. Plantin sometimes shared expenses with authors or other booksellers. A printed page began, therefore, with agreements and choices that might remain invisible once the finished book was opened. Official approvals also mattered. Printers worked within systems of privilege, license, censorship, and inspection, and failure could bring fines or confiscation. Those pressures do not need to turn the evening into a political drama. They appear more quietly in the care given to copy and proof. A sheet prepared for wide circulation could not be treated as private writing. Words that had passed through an author's hand entered a business where accuracy, permission, reputation, and expense were tied together. The threat remained in the background of ordinary practice, shaping habits of documentation and review more often than producing visible confrontation. An editor prepared the text for composition. He read, corrected, adapted, and produced a clear handwritten copy for the compositor. Decisions about dimensions, paper quality, fonts, and illustrations were made in consultation with the master printer and senior editorial staff. The copy had to guide a person who would rebuild every line from separate pieces of metal. Its margins and marks were practical. They helped transform language from handwriting into measured space. In a multilingual house, that preparation could also involve scholars capable of recognizing scripts and languages unfamiliar to most workers. Near evening, a printer's copy might remain beside a composing stand, its lines already followed many times. The page is not precious because it is beautiful. It is useful because it directs the next action. A correction in the margin may save paper later. A abbreviation may help a line fit. A change in spacing may prevent confusion when several pages are imposed together. The manuscript has begun to lose the appearance of a private object and take on the disciplined shape of work. Under practical light, inked marks on the copy guide hands that will soon replace every written character with a separate metal sign. The compositor stands before wooden cases divided into many small compartments. The arrangement is not alphabetical in the simple sense a modern reader might expect. Frequently used letters must be reached efficiently, and different languages, scripts, and sizes require different sets of type. Plantin's office printed in Latin, Dutch, French, Greek, Spanish, Hebrew, German, Italian, Syriac, and Aramaic. The variety enlarged the business, but it also filled the workshop with systems that had to remain distinct. A single piece of type carries one raised character in reverse. Held between the fingers, it is small, dense, and easy to misplace. The compositor selects each piece and sets it into a composing stick, building a line from left to right while the letters themselves face backward. He works from the prepared copy, measuring the line against the space available. Spelling may be adjusted, words shortened, and spaces balanced so that language will fit a physical width. A line that reads naturally on paper begins here as a row of reversed surfaces whose meaning must be held in the worker's mind. When a line is complete, it joins other lines on a wooden galley. Gradually a column appears, though it cannot yet be read in the ordinary way. The compositor must recognize order through reversal. His attention moves between copy, hand, case, and metal. A wrong letter is not merely a thought corrected in the mind. It is a small object that must be lifted out and replaced. The labor is intellectual and manual at the same time. The work rewards memory, but it also punishes carelessness in ways that may not become visible until the proof reaches another room. Toward the end of the day, the case invites caution. Returning type to the wrong compartment would create errors in work not yet begun. A letter put away badly might wait there until another compositor selected it tomorrow. So the evening rhythm is slower than the morning's first reach. Finished lines remain secure on the galley, loose sorts are gathered, and the compartments recover their order. The metal does not remember where it belongs. The workshop must remember for it. Small compartments, rather than grand machines, preserve the possibility of beginning again in the morning without confusion. A page was not normally printed alone. Several pages were arranged together so that, after printing, folding, and gathering, they would appear in the proper sequence. Depending on the format, a form could contain 2, 4, 6, 8, 12, or 16 pages. To an untrained eye, the arrangement might look disordered, pages upside down, reversed, and separated by spaces that only made sense after the sheet was folded. To the workshop, this was a geometry learned through repetition. The printed side and the folded result belong to different moments, and the compositor must understand both before the first impression exists. The composed pages were gathered inside a rigid frame called a chase. Wooden blocks and other spacing material held the type in position. Every part had to be firm enough to withstand inking and pressure, but the surface also had to remain level. If one piece rose too high or sat too low, the impression could become uneven. The form translated many separate lines into one object that the press team could handle. A compositor might prepare one form in a working day. That measure gives the task a calm scale. Thousands of letters could pass through the hands before the frame was ready. The finished form contained language, but it also contained hours. Each line represented repeated choices of character, spacing, spelling, and alignment. Once locked, the form was no longer easily changed, yet it still had to pass through proof before full production. The frame, therefore, held not only content, but a temporary arrangement of labor that would later be dismantled and redistributed. In the late light, a completed form rests with a different kind of weight from loose type. It can be lifted as a unit, carried carefully, and placed where the press team will receive it. A second form may remain unfinished and stay on the stone or bench until morning. The distinction matters. Secure work can wait. Loose work can scatter. Evening order is created by deciding which state each object has reached, and by refusing to pretend that an incomplete page is already ready. A secure form can carry unfinished intention safely across the night, while an unsecured one risks turning a day's labor back into loose metal. Paper was one of the largest expenses in early printing. Plantin depended on paper makers and merchants beyond the house, and each project required choices about size and quality. The sheets arriving at the workshop were not blank in an abstract sense. They carried cost, credit, transport, and the labor of mills that had turned worn linen rags into a writing surface. Waste at the press could damage more than a single page. It could narrow the margin of an entire edition. Before printing, paper was slightly moistened. Dampness helped it receive the impression, but the sheet still had to be handled without tearing or distortion. It was fastened into the press assembly against the tympan and held in relation to a frisket that protected the margins and helped position the paper. These parts gave a broad, flexible sheet a repeatable place. The press could only produce consistency when the paper met the type in nearly the same way each time. The damp sheet was receptive rather than wet, prepared to take pressure while still keeping its shape through repeated handling. Ink was applied to the lock type with leather-covered pads or inking balls. The inkmen spread it across the raised surfaces, rather than filling the spaces between them. Too little ink weakened the letters. Too much could blur their edges and stain areas meant to remain clear. The task depended on touch, sight, and repeated comparison. Blackness on the pad was not enough. The form had to carry an even film across hundreds or thousands of small characters. The ink itself was a material craft, but the worker at the press judged it through the changing surface of each impression. Near evening, ink, paper, and metal create three different forms of attention. Ink must remain workable. Paper must retain the right degree of dampness. Type must remain clean enough to print clearly. None of these materials follows the clock simply because the day is ending. The workers finish the sequence already underway, cover or store what must wait, and avoid preparing more than the remaining light and labor can safely complete. Prepared materials are not abandoned. They are brought to a stable point, protected from waste, and left ready for deliberate use. At the press, work becomes coordinated movement. The form is secured on the bed. The inkman covers the type. A damp sheet is positioned in the tympan assembly. The carriage moves beneath the platen and the printer draws the bar so that pressure brings paper and type together. Then the motion reverses. The sheet is released, examined briefly, and carried away while the press is prepared again. Hands learn where to pause, where to support the sheet, and how far to carry the motion without turning force into damage. A printer did not normally work alone. An assistant helped maintain the sequence, and the division of tasks allowed the press to continue with less interruption. In a well-practiced team, one person's movement prepared the next person's space. The work was repetitive but not mindless. Each impression could reveal a change in ink, paper, pressure, or alignment. Rhythm depended on noticing small differences without allowing every small difference to become delay. Fatigue could disturb that rhythm, which made the final hours dependent on habit and cooperation, rather than on speed alone. A single press could produce about 1,250 sheets printed on both sides in a day. That required roughly 2,500 impressions, and the average working day could last 14 hours. Printers were often paid by output, which encouraged long days and steady production. These figures describe capacity, rather than the exact count for every press on every date. Their value lies in showing why evening might still find a team completing work that had begun many hours earlier. The length of the day also explains why a quiet evening in the workshop need not be an idle one. It can be the last measured portion of sustained labor. As the day narrows, the press rhythm becomes easier to hear because other tasks are beginning to stop. The bar moves, the frame answers, and paper leaves the machine with fresh ink. There is no need to exaggerate the sound. A wooden press is not a later industrial engine. Its power comes from leverage, human weight, and repeated control. When the final prepared sheets have passed through, the absence of the next sheet is enough to change the room. One completed run leaves a space in which the creak of timber, the shift of paper, and the worker's breathing are briefly more noticeable. The first impression was not simply the first finished page. It was evidence. Proofreaders compared the printed sheet with the prepared copy and marked errors that had entered during editing, composition, or printing. A wrong letter, damaged sort, uneven line, or misplaced space could still be corrected, but every correction required the form to be opened or adjusted. The press waited only as long as necessary, because paper, labor, and schedule were all expensive. Proof was the point at which the page first answered back, showing what the copy and the metal had actually produced together. Apprentices hung printed sheets to dry while proofreaders continued their work. The room gained a temporary architecture of paper. Broad surfaces held apart so that wet ink would not transfer. Air moved between them. Printed sides faced outward. A sheet that had passed through pressure remained vulnerable until the ink settled. Handling it carelessly could undo several earlier stages in a moment. Their movement connected the force of the press with the patience of reading, carrying wet evidence from one kind of work to another. If a serious mistake was found, the type on the press might have to be changed. Because paper was costly, printers did not discard sheets lightly. Corrections made during a print run could leave small textual differences between copies of the same edition. The finished book might appear uniform, yet the production history could remain inside it, one corrected state beside another. Accuracy was pursued within the practical limits of time and material. A reader centuries later may notice none of these changes, yet the archive of the page can preserve them in spelling, spacing, or corrected type. In the evening, proof under review slows the surrounding work without stopping the whole house. The reader follows one line at a time. Nearby, sheets already approved continue to dry. The press team may complete another safe sequence while waiting for a decision. This is not the stillness of a library. It is the quieter concentration that protects a large edition from repeating a small error hundreds of times. The marked sheet gathers attention without noise, and the room around it becomes temporarily organized by the possibility of correction. Printing created sheets, not immediately finished books. Once dry, the sheets had to be gathered in the correct order. Several pages printed on one large sheet would later be folded into a quire, and each quire had to join the next without omission or reversal. Collectors checked sequences and built ordered sets from material that still looked repetitive to anyone unfamiliar with the edition. Signature marks and learned sequence helped turn stacks of similar paper into the ordered body of an edition. This careful labor was not performed only by the men named in formal workforce counts. Museum records show that women also took part in proofreading and gathering. In 1583, only a few years after the evening followed here, an accounting note by Martina Plantin records that a collector named Merton brought his daughter to assist him. The detail is small, but it opens the workshop beyond the categories preserved in a single payroll. Her presence is not proof that every workshop used the same family arrangement, but it confirms that the labor of the book extended beyond official male categories. Family participation was also woven into the business. Plantin's daughters learned to read and write, and members of the household helped with correction and commercial work. Sons-in-law entered the enterprise, while Jean Rivière and later Martina Plantin belonged to the continuity that kept the house operating through difficult periods. Work moved across the boundary between family and firm, though roles and authority were not equal for everyone. The archive preserves names unevenly, yet it repeatedly shows that commercial continuity depended on people whose work was not always described with equal detail. Near the end of the day, gathered sheets form low, ordered piles. Their sequence matters more than their appearance. A missing quire can make a volume incomplete. A reversed one can disturb the reader far from Antwerp. The collector's work is quiet because its success is mostly invisible. When every section is present, the pile offers no spectacle. It simply holds the promise that separate impressions can become one book. Order here is a form of care, performed after the louder work of printing, and before the visible identity of the book is complete. Many 16th-century books were sold as loose, unbound quires. The buyer could take them to a binder and choose a covering suited to cost and use: paper, board, parchment, leather, or fabric. Plantin also worked with bookbinders who could provide finished copies. Binding therefore belonged to the life of the edition, but much of it occurred outside the press room. The printing house produced an object that could still take several physical forms before reaching a shelf. A scholarly volume, a practical handbook, and a devotional book might leave the same press room, but acquire very different coverings and patterns of use. The books did not all leave through one shop in the house. In 1580, Plantin's book-selling arrangements extended elsewhere in Antwerp through independent booksellers, commercial agents, export, exchange, and barter. The preserved shop now seen within the complex was installed there later, in 1639. For this earlier evening, Finished sheets and books belong to a network larger than the building. Crates, invoices, letters, carriers, and credit linking Antwerp with other markets. The absence of the later shop from this evening is important, because the surviving house should not be allowed to pull future arrangements backward in time. The Frankfurt Book Fair was one important meeting place for the European trade. Publishers and booksellers presented new works, negotiated exchange, and carried information about demand. Plantin's editions also traveled through branches and contacts in cities, such as Paris and Leiden. A book printed in one room could enter a geography far beyond the reach of the worker who pulled the press bar. Trade converted the repeated labor of the press into circulation, and circulation determined whether paper and wages could be paid for the next project. As evening approaches, commerce becomes paper again. An account is checked. A letter waits to be folded. A quantity is entered beside a name. The physical book and the written record travel together, each proving something different. One carries text to a reader. The other carries obligation back to the business. The press room may be settling, but the edition continues outward through promises, payments, and routes that remain active after the door is closed. Even after the last impression, the edition remains unfinished as a commercial event, because distance and trust still stand between production and payment. The Golden Compasses was both workplace and home. Plantin lived there with Jean Rivière and their family, while servants, apprentices, employees, visitors, and business partners moved through different parts of the complex. Domestic rooms did not erase commercial pressure, and commercial work did not erase ordinary household needs. Meals, illness, education, correspondence, hospitality, and accounting all had to find space near the production of books. The building joined these activities physically, but it did not make every room public or every family member a worker of the same kind. The surviving company and family archive contains letters, diaries, invoices, accounts, regulations, and complaints accumulated across centuries. It is unusually complete, which is why UNESCO placed it on the Memory of the World Register. Those papers reveal that a famous printing house was maintained through daily decisions rather than through reputation alone. Credit could be uncertain. Deliveries could be late. Workers could disagree. A household that printed learned books still had to solve practical problems, one entry at a time. The completeness of the archive does not remove uncertainty. It gives uncertainty boundaries and allows ordinary events to remain ordinary. Letters were essential to Plantin's network. Authors, scholars, officials, agents, suppliers, and booksellers could not all stand in the same room. Near evening, correspondence might be read for a final time or left ready for the next dispatch. The letter has a different rhythm from the press. It waits for a route, a carrier, and a distant reply. A sentence written in Antwerp could influence paper ordered elsewhere, corrections made at the press, or books offered months later at a fair. When the workshop grows quieter, the house does not become empty. The family side retains its own movement. A servant crosses a passage. Someone reads by limited practical light. A meal or account may continue after the press bar has stopped. The boundary between work and rest is therefore gradual. The same walls hold both, and the day withdraws unevenly from room to room. Rest enters first where the most repetitive labor has ended, and last where reading, planning, and domestic responsibility continue. The final change in the printing house is made of absences. No fresh sheet is fixed into the tympan. No new line begins in the composing stick. The inked pads are no longer carried toward the form. Dry sheets remain suspended or stacked according to their condition. Finished type stays locked where it is safe, while loose pieces return to their cases. Tomorrow's order is built from what has been left undisturbed tonight. The room is no longer organized by throughput, but by preservation, each object kept in the state most likely to survive the pause. No single famous publication has guided the rooms from first page to last tonight. Plantin's workshop produced religious, humanist, scientific, botanical, linguistic, medical, cartographic, and musical books, often in several languages. Any one of them could fill another history. What remains in view is the shared craft itself. Copy becoming type, type becoming impression, impressions becoming gatherings, and gatherings entering trade. The process is large enough to sustain 30 quiet minutes of attention because each stage changes both the material and the responsibility attached to it. Outside, Rydog Mart receives the people leaving the house. The square is darker than it was at the beginning, but the workshop has not vanished into mystery. Its work is legible in the objects left behind. A secured form, ordered cases, a corrected proof, a drying sheet, an account awaiting continuation. Nothing dramatic arrives. The value of the night lies in the fact that the process can pause without being lost. Tomorrow will not need to rediscover the work. It will only need to take it up from these stable positions. For a few hours, the golden compasses holds its many languages without speaking them. Metal letters wait in narrow compartments. Paper rests after pressure. Ink settles into fibers. The bar of the press remains still. Beyond the closed workroom, the household continues more softly, and beyond the house the printed sheets begin journeys the workers may never see. Until morning, the only task remaining is to let the workshop keep its place. The pause does not end the book's making. It simply hands the unfinished sequence from one day to the next.